Okay, we're back for the final part of these 3 mini lectures. We're going to look at the open book resource. Over to you. Open book exam resource. Okay, so this we're going to look at what open book exams are. We'll talk about the process. We've got some examples there. We'll talk about whether we need to have an editing team. We'll have some examples, look at some scenarios, and then we'll have a look at the exam paper and how the marking and feedback will work. Okay, so open book exams. I mentioned this a bit earlier in the introduction. You will be developing the resource yourself, working in small teams. There's not in the first lecture. This is a better model of how professionals work compared to closed book exams, and will allow you to evidence key professional skills, organising, summarising, teamwork, and etc. I mentioned before, and I'll mention it again, the deadline will be end of week 6. Now, it's not a gigantically academically difficult exercise. You'll need to organise yourselves, get the information together and format it up in an appropriate format which we can then collect into the main resource. Again, as mentioned before, you don't see this in professional life. Nobody works like this. Last year I produced 70 pages. The students did most of it. I did some of it, and I'll probably do a couple of sections as an example that you may want to consider the format and things like that. But the rest will be up to you. Okay, so the process, we'll introduce it in now. We'll talk about briefly in week 1. In week 2, we'll clearly have divided them into topics and teams, and they'll be starting to do some research. Week 3, we'll have a workshop in the initial ideas. A couple of weeks to work on that. We'll come back in workshop in week 5 for the final draft, and then in workshop in week 6, we'll get everything together, final workshop, and we'll submit. It's quite a timetable, and the exam and associated material need to be ready by the end of week 6. As I mentioned, it allows time for review by internal and external examiners, and also subsequent editing and printing. This is a hard deadline. We can't delay beyond this. We'll discuss this in workshops, but here's some suggested main headings with sensory development a bit further. Mind mapping, attribute analysis will be one of the early tasks for groups, which more in a moment, I think. So you need a consistent format for all parts of the open book resource, and I'm suggesting that each section starts with a mind map. Again, here's an example from last year. The group doing sensory methods, and there will be one, will want to critically evaluate this and maybe make some improvements. Then possibly a list of bullet points which can be effectively a table of contents for that section. As a logical progression here, we start with some key definitions, we develop these into different methods, and we finally propose a plan of action. So the table of contents will link to then the specific details about the various subtopics, and here's some examples here on preference difference testing, so with the introduction, why you would use it, and a little bit starting to talk about various tests. Again, the details meant to provide a logical framework. If you read, you can review it as why we're doing this, who would do it, what types of tests would we use, what are the requirements for that test, how would we analyse it, including statistics, and pros and cons. Consistency editing. Last year we didn't have a editing team. We'll decide this year whether we want one to bring everything together in a consistent format. I did it last year. I generally preferred if the students did this. So do we need an editorial team? Best band in history says yes. More later. Topics mapping example. Okay, so a slightly blurry example taken from last year's resource. Only the detailed sensory plans have been developed here. We'll have a look at sensory room design considerations in the next few slides as a sort of expanded example. So sensory room design. There's some specifics there associated with that particular topic, but this general approach should work with all the topics. You get a review of the relevant background, you mind map key concepts, develop a table of contents, write summaries, and add to the open book resource in a consistent format. If we all do that, across the various tasks we have to do, we'll end up with a really good resource which will be very helpful for you in the exam. Okay, scenarios. A typical exam question will have a format like this. you have been asked to plan some changes in a company of particular size and manufactures a particular type of product. Now, you won't be expected to review details of production, HACCP or anything like that. They're not part of this module. The open book resource will contain the bulk of what you need to answer the questions, but you are finally a food student, and it may be that your knowledge and experience can contribute a little bit more. But let's be clear, this is not an exam you revise for in the traditional way. I'll repeat that again. This is not an exam you revise for in the traditional way. An open book exam is about organising information to address specific professional questions. Now, there's 6 different product types here, and I don't intend to change them. That will allow you to do some general background reading, not revision, about these products. And then, as I said in the previous slide, we are planning for example, sensory analysis in a reduced, to produce, say, in a medium-sized company to produce reduced calorie versions of milks and yogurts. I'm just picking some out randomly there. There's a bunch of there's those there, and you can find ways yourself to do this. You can just roll the dice. So I'll roll the dice there. And item 2, item 1, item 5 are shelf life testing for a small to medium-sized company that manufactures biscuits. You shouldn't expect to know, again, all of the answers to these, but you should be flexible enough to develop an answer based on what's contained in the open book resource. We're not asking you to remember everything you need to know about shelf life testing or biscuit manufacture. It's not that sort of exam. Okay, it's the exam paper, sans the questions. The usual stuff you've seen. We'll notice it contains 3 questions. You will answer 2 of them. Yeah. Each question is 50 marks, worth 50 marks. On a 2-hour exam, you would expect to be spending about 50 minutes on each question. So these are long, detailed answers. Here's just an example of a possible question. In this case, sensory evaluation. Here's another one for textual analysis. As I said before, it would be based probably on biscuits or something similar, based on the previous categories of product we had. We'll look at another one, shelf life testing, and finally business plan, which in this case will probably involve things like the stage gate approach. Okay, mark and feedback. The marks are distributed just sort of like this. It does vary a little bit depending on the subject, but generally speaking, you get 5 marks for an introductory summary. If you like an executive summary, then marks are available for detailed information. You need to note this is not just about copying information from the resource. You must apply the information in the context of the question asked as it applies to that business, that product, and the changes they want to make. Other issues is a comment category that helps the marker consider, that's me, how well you have linked knowledge to application, how well you have used your general food knowledge to help answer the question. So it may contribute to marks in each of these categories. You will get a marking feedback sheet when the exam result is posted in Blackboard. It'll be structured in terms of the way the marking was done and of a reasonable amount of detail. Right, okay. Thanks for listening.